All right, welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a immigration podcast.
Sometimes operates.
A sometimes immigration podcast. I'm the host, Stephen Robbins, with my co-host, Matthew Archambault, fellow immigration attorney in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We were going to come together today to bury the podcast.
Okay.
At least that's what we talked about the last time we chatted, right? Let's be done. Yeah. Let's be done with it. Screw this. This sucks. Everything sucks. And
I don't think the podcast sucks. I don't think you suck.
Well, so
it's a subject matter sucks.
I do have a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I think,
No, it's real. I mean, it's you're.
It's not a syndrome. You're an imposter. The good thing about the podcast is being able to reach out to people who are just better and smarter than us at certain things, and we get to talk to them. And so I've sort of talked myself into keeping the podcast alive, but trying to schedule it ahead of time. Here's some wild and crazy ideas: to work on the content beforehand, to have sort of an outline, guests that we can schedule. This might be pie in the sky New Year's resolution.
No, so this right now, what you are saying is the Democratic immigration reform plan exercise. This is what we're going to do. It's going to be different this time.
This time, I think it's the same thing we've said every year for the last 3 or 4 years. But
how many years have we done this?
I think we started in 2014. So we're, it's 8 years. Oh. And so here's the deal. Over on the Patreon, patreon.com/redirect, I listed our upcoming schedule.
Okay.
I'm going to try and start plugging in guests. If you're a fan of this show and you're an expert on something and you want to come on, let me know. I'll be reaching out to some people too. Part of the problem is this. We've launched so many careers from this show. And then these people, I'm not going to name names. These people go on CNN, they're on Mehdi Hassan's show, and the next thing you know,
they don't even return nothing.
They're not responding to DMs. They're big shots. And, I get it. But, at some point, we're basically like the clubs that in Hamburg that the Beatles played in, right? Like, they got in their reps, and we helped form the Beatles, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, you make some points.
I did want to talk a little bit with you about burnout, because I remember when we started the show, we did a bunch of episodes, not a bunch, but I remember talking about burnout with other people and on the show and sort of how can people avoid burnout, talking about other people.
Right.
And now it's like 100% me. I need a pep talk from somebody about how not to be completely burnt out.
For me?
Well, no, you obviously can't deliver a pep talk about being burnt out. We're just two burnt out people. But I mean, what are you feeling right now as an immigration law practitioner?
So someone called and they were asking about this new parole thing, right? You heard about this with Nicaraguans, and I think maybe you asked me about it. And my response was, what does it matter? It's not going to work. And God forbid if it works, there's going to be a lawsuit that's going to stop it. So, I don't care. So yeah, that's kind of where I am at. Where it's just hard we report, quote unquote, or we talk about things that, rumored to happen or are in the works, and they hardly ever happen, right? And stuff that happens wrong. And it's frustrating. So yeah, where am I? It's just hard to do it on a consistent basis. It really is sometimes.
We talked about at the end of the Trump administration how there was so much going on that good experienced lawyers were calling each other saying, what is the fee for a work permit right now? And there was a whole convoluted flow chart of, are you a member of a certain organization? And if so, then, what is the category and when did you file? So, and it just got to the point where it was honestly impossible to be on top of some of this stuff. Cause like you're saying, it was just day to day changing. And that sort of, in some areas, has been tamped down a little bit, but in others, specifically with what's going on at the border and Title 42 and these new parole programs, I mean, it's just been impossible. And it requires such a high, like a narrow area of expertise. When people call me and they say, I've got a family member who's, wanting to apply for asylum at the border, what should we do? There's like one person that you can talk to that knows the answer to that question. Taylor Levy, who's been on this show, and maybe there's other people, but even with Taylor, like her answer changes from day to day, right? Like what somebody who wants to apply for asylum at the border should do. And so, yeah, it becomes hard to keep up with, frustrating in sort of the nature of the changes that are happening. These aren't like overwhelmingly positive things. And after a while, it sucks. I don't know what else to say.
I think none of us had any like high expectations for the Biden administration, right? Like, I don't think there was anyone that would be like, oh my God, this is going to be the most transformative administration for immigration rights. There were some positive things right at the beginning, really, with the Attorney General, with decisions that overturned some like bad BIA decisions and bad AG decisions in the past. And that's been really positive. But really beyond that, there hasn't been much positive, and there's been a whole lot of just like super stuff. And it's like, we hear the mantra all of like vote blue, no matter who, and all that. And it's like getting to the point where we talked about the concept of worse, right? And that was one of kind of our founding discussions that we had. Like, okay, Obama might not be great, but, this other person, it was worse than. And, Trump is worse than Obama. It's going to be worse than Hillary. Hillary's not going to be good, but Trump's going to be worse. You get it, right? And now we're getting to Biden. Okay, Biden's going to be better. A second term of Trump is going to be worse than Biden. And that might all be true, but now it's like getting to like, we're really like leaning hard on that word. Oh, this would be worse, so let's do this, where it's like, how much worse?
Well, yeah.
And it's like gradations, and it's like, it's like that needle is just, toggling so much closer to the it doesn't matter line. So.
Right. And I don't want to get bogged down in electoral politics. I think that what you're trying to say is the distinction still matters. It still exists, but it's almost like the two sides are trying to come as close as possible to make it like,
Yeah, I guess the only saving grace is like the left side seems to be moving to catch the right side, and the right side is still really trying to barrel ahead and get away from that. So, and that's, I think, the point that we've always made is all these concessions that the left will give to try to pull the right towards them never works. And you would think after how many years of them doing the same thing that we're observing, they would start to understand that, but it seems to just escape them for whatever reason. But yeah, for all those reasons, practicing has, it gets irritating, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I'll say there is something still exciting and rewarding about preparing a case, going to court, winning a case on a unique argument, or doing something that you feel like, I made a real difference in this case, right? But as you know, at least in my experience, more and more of my practice is being dominated by, why is my work permit taking so long? Why is my U visa taking so long? Why is my 601A waiver taking so long? We had one of these waivers, which in the past, would take anywhere from like 6 to 10 months, more or less. And now they're saying, well, they can take up to 2 years. This is the published processing time. So we had a family that was outside of processing times. We filed a complaint. They said they needed 30 days to respond. We waited the 30 days and we logged in to check the processing times. And now it says 3 years, 36 months. So now they're back within normal processing times because somebody, invented a new date that they're, and basically the point is more and more of my day and my life is being sucked up by these sort of bureaucratic failures of an agency that collects plenty of money, you would think, and yet can't seem to move some of this stuff along for some reason. So those kinds of delays are very frustrating. It's especially frustrating when it's sort of unclear why it's happening. Do they have a shortage of people, or like what's going on? Like, we don't know. And God bless the clients, right? I'm not going to try and throw people under the bus. If I were somebody who applied for a work permit and paid a fee, I would also want to know, why is it taking a year and a half to adjudicate a 4-page form that I've had before, right? It's just a renewal. But, on the other hand, as an attorney, when the same person calls 4, 5, 6 times and you feel like you've sort of gone through it with them, I don't know, it's all very sort of exhausting in like kind of a boring way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know there's much bigger issues here. I don't want to make it sound like, there's people whose lives are at stake, of course. I'm just talking about the, sort of the mundane nature of, the day-to-day and how it can be, it can wear down on you after a while.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like, so let's go back to our discussion about ending the podcast, right? So the only reason why I like doing the podcast is talking to you. So yeah,
you're a sweetheart.
Yeah, and I realized like we could actually just talk on the phone. We don't even need the podcast format to talk.
That would be super awkward. What I will say, yeah, I did delete my Twitter for a while, and I was, sort of going into reclusive mode. I'm gonna erase this part of my life and quit the podcast. And I will say, the podcast is an opportunity to talk to you, talk to other people. If there's an issue that I don't totally understand, it's great to have an excuse to talk to somebody. Because a lot of our colleagues, if you just called them and said like, hey, do you want to talk for an hour? They'd be like, no. But if it's for a podcast, then, suddenly it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way we get to like talk to like people like Austin.
Right.
Remember when Luis used to talk to us? Cortez?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Those are good times.
Well, see, that's the thing is we just launch all these careers, take full responsibility for that. So anyways, I do think it's worth investing a little bit of time in. Maybe we do the show a little less frequently, but on a schedule, and we try and make it better. And, the other thing, in terms of imposter syndrome, I have noticed that there's more and more people in this space, right? We have more competition.
Do we? So I don't listen to podcasts. So I have honestly, it's true. I don't
listen to immigration law podcasts, but I know that they're sort of out there. And so then part of me is like, I don't know. What do we have to offer? We're just a couple of dorks,
Someone said early on we were the car talk of immigration law. And it might be showing my age. I guess they're still on. I think maybe
I think they're dead.
Yeah. So
maybe that's what they meant.
Who don't know, Car Talk was a show on NPR where these two brothers, auto mechanics, they would talk about cars, and they would talk about it in a way that even like wimps like me who couldn't change the oil in my car to save my life could understand and be entertained. Right. So that's kind of our goal, is to talk about immigration law in a way that someone who's not deeply entranced in nuances of immigration law could hopefully understand.
Maybe we should take calls and do on-air consultations with people, and then make jokes about the situation.
Worst thing I could ever imagine. I wouldn't mind taking calls about like, oh, what about this? But if I would get one call where it'd be like, well, the thing is, I filed my work permit like 3.5 months ago, and I would die, because that's what we do every day. But anyways, so should we talk about something that's going on in immigration law right now, as we're waiting for Austin, who's going to join us in a few minutes?
Well, I did want to talk real quick about being at my parents' house last week.
Okay. Yeah, that's what the listeners tune in for.
Yeah, they love these stories. So
I wonder how
this is another.
He hasn't mentioned her in a while. Is she okay?
They're both doing great. This is another sort of thing that weighs on a practitioner in a way that's sort of exhausting, is just the news coverage of the border and immigration in general. And it was funny because my parents have the news on like all the time. And something like the border is, even though it's covered, it's very confusing. And a couple of times I was in the room when CNN would talk about it, and they talk about it as being a crisis and, all these kinds of terms. It's never clear, like, for whom is it a crisis? Now, if it were a crisis for the people at the border, like, these are people who fled terrible situations. They're trying to exercise their international rights under international human rights law, and they're being kept outside of the country. That's a crisis for them, right? But I think they mean generally, like, sort of vaguely, it's a crisis for like white people in the United States. The fact that these people are showing up at our door is the crisis. Anyways, I just felt like the framing, it didn't educate people at all. Everything has to be done in these 30-second clips. And I just found that to be deeply frustrating. And then one night at dinner, my dad came in.
Oh.
You know about these students that were killed in Idaho?
Oh, yeah. Vaguely. Okay. I don't watch the news that much, I'll be honest.
Okay. Well, me neither, but
yeah.
My dad came in, and you would have thought he was the prosecutor running the case. He knew the kind of car the guy was driving, what color it was, where he was stopped on his way to Pennsylvania. He was practically giving a time-stamped timeline of the events.
Because that's PowerPoint.
Yeah, he brought out a projector and put up a big old PowerPoint on the side of the wall.
Stay with me on these, folks. It gets a little tricky here.
Yeah. So, anyways, I mean,
Buick Skylark.
I don't think that's unique to my dad. That people gravitate to sort of salacious news, but on the one hand, it's frustrating, but on the other hand, it did make me think, like, maybe we do have a role in packaging some of this stuff in a way that's like accessible, somewhat entertaining, and we can get regular people who don't have time to learn all of immigration law to sort of pay attention a little bit. So, anyways.
Yeah, don't watch the news, folks. That's one thing.
Heavy sigh.
It is like those news stories, like what happened in Idaho. Those are the kind of news stories, like, I don't understand why people, because it doesn't affect you. It affects those for individuals and their families and all those. But then it gets like this wall-to-wall coverage. Like, for right. What? I mean, I don't get it. And then the whole framing of the border thing. I mean, thank God. The only thing I think of when something like that, like 4 dead college students found like slaughtered in their home, is like, please don't let the person be an immigrant. Like, that's it's like they're a white guy. Fine, we can move on with our lives. But
yeah, America's got a weird true crime fetish. I don't think it's new. Like, we grew up watching 2020 on.
It's not new at all. It's just, it is weird. I haven't lived enough in other countries to know if they also care deeply about these things. But anyways, on the immigration front, how's it going over there? You guys doing good?
Yeah, pretty good. Overall, I think we're starting to have more hearings. Some of the stuff that was taken off the calendar because of COVID is, back on the calendar.
Well, let me ask you this, and maybe people who listen regularly understand that immigration law is federal, right? And we do means
hold on. Let me write this down. Hold on.
Means to even do removal defense, meaning people that the government wants to kick out of the country because they don't believe they have the right to be here. Means to even defend these people's rights to stay here in many different forms. But immigration courts, they operate all under the same rules, but they operate so vastly differently from one part to the other. So I operate mostly in Philadelphia and Newark. And the difference between those two courts, it's like a night and day. You almost think it was like totally two different systems of law. One thing the Philadelphia courts are doing is we're now receiving a lot of these notice of intent to take off calendar.
Right.
And it's for reasons like, they could file their asylum applications affirmatively because maybe they're unaccompanied minors or they think they're unaccompanied minors. They have some other visa petition pending with USCIS.
I'm going to correct you.
Or they have cancellation applications filed, and I don't know what the actual reason, but we're receiving lots of those from Philadelphia, not one from Newark. Are you guys?
That's interesting. See, I've received 3 or 4 so far, and I learned that those are coming not from the courts themselves, but from like EOIR headquarters. They're sending those out, dropping them, into the mail. They're labeled as if they're coming from the immigration court, but they're actually coming from headquarters. And then the judges sort of manage the responses that are coming in. And I've had them come in 3 different cases that, like one case, the guy had quite a lot of criminal history, and ICE responded saying, no, we want to keep going on this case. And then in a couple other cancellation cases that seemed to be just sort of randomly selected, they could have been any of my cases. It's a docket management tool that, from my understanding, what I've been told by people at UIR, is coming.
Look at you with the connections.
I don't want to brag, but it is sort of coming from higher up.
No, because I've gotten probably about 20.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that's a lot.
So then now, of course, we have to call the client, because what the notice is essentially saying, hey, if no one contacts us by this day, say January 30th, we're going to take this case off the docket. I'm guessing like administrative closure type thing. And we're just going to put it over here until someone decides they want to do something with it. And some cases make sense. In other cases I have where there is pretty significant criminal history. And then one case I have where it was an affirmative asylum application that got referred to the court. And so we're just waiting for a merits hearing. And they're like, oh, you can file this affirmatively with the asylum unit, which we had already done. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of digging in. And I'm just really curious as to how they're making these decisions. But you have to call the client and have a conversation with them about it. I have one client who I'm really pushing. They're going to deny your case. And you always try to be optimistic, but realistic and not to be too harsh. But he was really, I want my day in court. It's been a long time. And finally I had to say, listen, you're going to get your day in court and you're not going to like what's the outcome. And just you're not going to like it. And so he's considering it. We haven't had any responses from ICE, so I don't know.
Yeah, I did get one response from ICE. I did have a case recently I wanted to ask you about. So in immigration court, it's the respondent's burden, it's our burden to establish eligibility for relief, right? So the prosecutor, the ICE attorney, is basically there to, present the charging document, to conduct cross-examination, to submit evidence that might, what do you call it? Undermine the testimony, impeachable evidence, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Anyways. And, theoretically to make legal arguments, to present evidence, that sort of a thing. Now, in general.
Also, I think it is to come to the truth of the matter.
Well, okay. That's your hippy dippy theory of what their role is. But so I had this case, and how often does ICE file anything in a removal case other than, technically the department files a notice to appear? So setting that aside, how many evidence packets, briefs, in what percentage of cases are you getting anything?
Okay, I'm also going to set aside what's called the I-213, which is...
Because I know you like to beg for that.
Yeah.
But okay, so other than that...
Yeah, like probably 5% of the cases.
Yeah,
and that was
generous. That's exactly the number I was going to say too. About 5%.
And 95% of the time, it's hilarious.
Yeah. So, right. Typically, it's not evidence packets. We get a lot of boilerplate briefs. There's an ICE attorney, and he likes to file. It's not even a boilerplate brief. It's like a checkbox, quote unquote, brief. So it's like the Department of Homeland Security hereby argues the following, and then it's like 10 things, and then he checks a box. So it's not even really a brief. It's just a checkbox. Anyways, I had this case, the judge asked the government for their position at the beginning, and they say they have no position. And we're now joined by a friend of the show, Austin Kocher.
Hi, everyone.
Hey!
I made it.
We're all raising the roof just for the listening audience. Actually, it's just me.
Austin has come from a closet,
yes.
It appears.
Yeah. My recording studio in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's nice.
Is it just like The Wire?
It's I don't think I'm allowed to comment on that.
What season of The Wire are you currently living in right now? Season 2? Is it a season 2 situation? With the stevedores, or what are they called?
The dock workers. Yes.
Anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Is stevedore a word?
I think that's the job. That's not a question for me. That's not my area of expertise.
Yes, Austin. Is it a location? Is it a location? Is it?
Oh, okay.
Town or city somewhere?
You're making fun of me. I was in the middle of telling a story about our friends over at ICE.
Just nod like you're interested. Just don't worry.
Yeah, just nod like you're.
The same thing I'm doing.
So we get through this case. It's very sympathetic, and then at the end, the judge asks the government for their position, and again they say no position. And I just feel like if you're going to be a prosecuting attorney, and the case is all the way over, a case that you started, right? Don't you think they should kind of have to have a position? I don't understand that.
Yeah, that happens.
Isn't that weird?
That happens a lot. And sometimes they'll tell you oh, well, we'll just defer to the court. And that's our signal to the court. I'm okay if you grant it. But why don't you just say that? I don't understand. It would be nice to have a trial attorney on. I guess we'd have to have an ex-trial attorney on it.
Wouldn't be that nice.
That could explain this dynamic of, do they get in trouble if they agree to a grant, or I don't quite understand it, but
she reserved appeal though.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
But also didn't have a position on the merits of the case. So anyways, Austin, how's it going?
It's going great. Honestly. Yeah.
Well, you then.
Yeah, because it's going terrible for us. So
you're gonna try and lift our spirits with your good attitude.
I never come on here and lift anyone's spirits. You know that. I come on and rant about terrifying government surveillance. That's still expanding, by the way.
All right. So listen, tell the folks about TRAC.
Yeah. So TRAC is a research institute at Syracuse University that studies the federal government using FOIA requests and litigation. Basically, we try to get government data and give it to what I'm told is the American people, whoever that is.
Oh.
One thing that's useful for TRAC, I've had clients who maybe have a hearing scheduled in San Francisco. They want to change the venue to Seattle. I pull up TRAC and I say, that's not a good idea because the asylum approval rate in San Francisco is much higher than it is here. And then they usually want to change venue anyways, but at least I've warned them. So that's one thing that you guys do is you compile information about the different immigration judges and the different courts and their grant rates.
Yeah.
What's the other kind of stuff that you have been gathering or trying to gather?
Yeah, so we have all kinds of research on the federal government beyond immigration that probably people in the immigration space aren't as aware of. We actually have more data than anyone in the country on IRS audits. So we report a lot of data on IRS audits, and it turns out they audit poor and working people a lot more than they do people who can afford big-time attorneys.
First of all, that sounded kind of like a Trump brag. More than anyone else.
More than anyone.
More data than.
Well,
I've been audited before, so
More data
like I
than
said, you Richie Riches over there.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
They gotcha.
me.
No, it's true. Yeah. So IRS stuff, we also look at federal criminal prosecutions and civil litigation, but even just within the immigration space, I mean, we get data from, CBP, ICE, the immigration courts. So we get a lot of data, but actually like the thing that I think is maybe most interesting and fun is the government often puts out reports and data on all kinds of things. Either they have to or they want to or whatever. And most people, when they look at something that the government puts out, is like, oh, this many people were deported last year, or this many people didn't get asylum, or they did get asylum. And for most people, having that top level number is just like enough. But actually, there's a lot that goes into every number that you see. And there's a lot of human decisions that go into how you count these things. And the way that the government counts things, I know this will blow your minds. Sometimes they count things in ways that align most with their policy and political position and not actually.
What?
I know. You've heard it first here on Redirect. And so it's valuable, I think, for us to have not just the summarizing data or that top, but actually to have someone, we are the someone, actually get the underlying data and say, okay, is that a defensible conclusion, or are there caveats to that, or is it just wrong? Are they just not being honest about stuff? And so that's what we do. Is sometimes it's like, oh yeah, this is what's happening. And a lot of times what we're writing about is when we find inconsistencies or alternative facts, as
There's a lot of talk about apprehensions at the borders versus encounters at the border. The Biden administration versus Trump administration, are they putting out different metrics? How is that information coming in differently, or how are they?
Talk about the crisis of the surge.
Oh, the surge.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and just tell us, and when you do it, we're going to play some scary music in the background. So. You're not going to hear it, but it'll be there on final production. That's not scary enough. We'll do like
that's sad.
Yeah, it's sad. Well,
sad.
a nice like.
And if you could have video running in the background of like people coming through the river or something, that would be great.
Yeah, we're gonna blur it a little bit too, because I think that makes it a little.
It does
a little more ominous,
more sinister.
Yeah, like are those women or are those like teenage boys who are gonna rape us?
Strapping young men who are invading our country.
Okay,
and the important thing is that the video clip is also actually not from this week, but from like 7 years ago or something. It doesn't matter, and it could be from like a different country.
I find the Guatemalan-Mexican border actually a little better.
Oh yeah.
I think it kind of yeah. So anyway, keep that in mind when you. So what are the differences in how they're presenting? Are they the exact same figures, or are they?
Yeah, I think this is a good example of where a little bit of confusion goes a long way. So like when Border Patrol is arresting someone between ports of entry, there's a difference, and this is just true in like all of the immigration system. There's a difference between like the number of times that Border Patrol has contact with someone versus the full life of that single individual. So if Border Patrol arrests someone for the first time, you've got one point of contact between a migrant and an officer, and you've got one person. Well, with Title 42 in place, which is a policy that effectively turns back migrants without any processing really taking place within the immigration system, that person may get arrested or stopped at the border and then sent back, but they could try again tomorrow or the next day or the next week. And so you've got effectively, Border Patrol is tracking this and they're saying, oh, let's say we've had 5 encounters this week. Well, it could be 5 different people, or it could be one person who's attempted to cross 5 times. And what that has led to, what Title 42 has led to, is really inflated numbers of encounters that don't really accurately reflect the picture of the total number of people who are coming across. So like if the 3 of us go down to the border and we try to cross 100 times a week, Border Patrol's like, we're being flooded with people. And it's actually just 3 people who keep trying to cross again and again. That's a little bit of an exaggerated scenario, but it shows you what you can do with misunderstanding the data.
I mean, that's actually what we're going to be doing in February.
Oh, exactly.
So stay tuned.
We got a little vacay plan. No, I think it's important for people to understand that before Title 42, and we should be in a post-Title 42 world, there was essentially, the system that exists has release valves, right? So people can request asylum, some people get let in, and some people are deported in a way that has consequences. Mm-hmm. So they might be deterred from re-entering. But Title 42 takes sort of both the consequence of re-entry, of being charged in federal court with illegal re-entry, takes that off the table. And it also takes the release valve of, allowing people in, although there are some exceptions to Title 42, but, takes that away. And that's what creates the sort of pressure cooker situation of people just coming over and over and over again.
Yeah, very much.
So yeah. I do know that you've been doing a lot of work recently on surveillance or electronic monitoring or whatever euphemism we're going to call for, like shackling people with stuff to keep track of them. And what are you finding now?
Well, there's been a massive increase during the Biden administration of the number of people that they're tracking using different kinds of electronic monitoring. And electronic monitoring, just as a background, been around for decades. It was rolled out in the UK decades ago. It sort of got part of its history in the United States, comes out of Arizona in the 60s and 70s. There was a judge down there, Judge Love, who was seeing electronic monitoring as a way to say, oh, if you're a high-risk individual, you shouldn't have to be in prison or jail. We'll put an ankle monitor on you and you can go home. It was like, this technology solution, in the middle of the growth of mass incarceration. And so it's often been pitched as a kind of humanitarian alternative to keeping people in detention centers or prisons. But the reality is it actually takes the prison with you. It makes the home a prison. Most types of electronic monitoring have certain geographic parameters around them. So it could be the house, it could be the community, it could be certain times when you're allowed to leave the home, that kind of thing. But in the past 2 years, especially, this technology has really been applied to the immigration system. Now, it's been used in the immigration system for 20 years, but it's really tremendously exploded during the Biden administration. I'll just give you an example. At the start of the Biden administration, there were less than 85,000. Now, 85,000 is a lot, but there were less than 85,000 people in electronic monitoring of some kind. There are now about 400,000 migrants being monitored on some type of electronic monitoring. And if you count all the people who were monitored and have been essentially released from monitoring, that number is probably closer to 600, 700,000 people. So it's a lot of people who are being effectively tracked, whether it's with a GPS ankle monitor, which is used less in immigration these days, and is more through smartphones. So either on one's personal smartphone or a smartphone that the government gives migrants solely for the purpose of tracking. They can't download Instagram or TikTok on these phones. They're just for tracking. But it means it's a lot of people who are uploading photos of themselves daily or weekly, who are having to respond to alerts, and who often report feeling a lot of anxiety. And let's remember, most of these people are people who are seeking asylum in the first place and have some presumption of eligibility for asylum to be in this program. So it's really concerning. And, I've been really concerned about, even though individuals, look, it's better that people are not in detention than they are in detention from their perspective and from a legal perspective. That's without dispute. But it's also a really massive expansion of the technology, because it's not like the government can detain 400,000 people. We don't have beds for that. So it's not as if all of these people would be in detention, but they're not, thank God, to this technology. This is an expansion of monitoring. And by the way, it's not just an alternative to detention. Now that CBP One, which is a new app that's being used for migrants who are coming to the border and requesting asylum, they now download an app on their smartphone in northern Mexico, not in the United States. They're downloading a smartphone app on their phone in northern Mexico or Venezuela or El Salvador, effectively scheduling a kind of asylum screening at the border. But that app as well has geolocation tracking and lots of other kinds of information sharing on it too. So I've been actually shifting my thinking to talking about what I refer to as the hemispherization, actually, of electronic monitoring. The fact that if you're in Latin America, North America, Central America, South America, between the SmartLink Alternatives to Detention app and the CBP-1 asylum border-related app, I mean, we're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of people in the hemisphere who are having high information density interactions with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security across time and space. And what are the aggregate consequences of that going to be? I think it's hard to predict, but there are real concerns around privacy and privacy sharing. I should just say, last point on this, there has been no privacy impact study done, which they effectively put this program under some older privacy impact work that was done. They've never really done an independent study that they're supposed to under law. So there's some privacy implications. I'm not an expert on that, but there's some reference.
I'm sure it's fine.
I'm sure it's
fine. Who would do anything wrong with your personal information?
It's not like they accidentally posted a bunch of asylum seekers' personal information on their website recently for several hours, which happened.
Okay, just mistakes. Do you have any numbers on the percentage of people who violate this electronic, that run afoul of it, either willfully or, I'll be honest, I have had clients who have cut the ankle monitor off and left.
Sure.
Do you have any numbers on that?
I don't. ICE does.
Okay, well, that's it. That's it for me. So
they call it absconding, and they do track some numbers on that. We are still trying to get it. One of the issues that we're facing right now, actually, is the fact that the agency, this again is news that will come as a first shock to everyone, has not been particularly cooperative with following the Freedom of Information Act laws to release data that is public record. So we'd like to look more closely at that. I have no doubt that there are plenty of examples of people absconding on this program, or for other reasons why they missed a check-in or missed one of the electronic calls, or even for the same reasons often that clients miss a check-in with ICE or miss an immigration hearing. It's not always for nefarious reasons. Sometimes it is, not always. So we'd like to understand that better. Based on the agency's own studies, some of their studies show that it makes a difference. Some of their studies show that it doesn't make any difference at all. And that electronic monitoring actually doesn't increase or decrease people's compliance rates. So I think the jury's still out when it comes to sort of a definitive answer as to whether or not this improves or doesn't improve compliance.
I think a couple things. One, I think it might be hard to get data because they probably don't keep it very well.
I always wonder if they know if people check in or not.
Yeah, during the pandemic especially, and I think maybe it's starting to change, but every single day we were getting calls from people saying, I have an appointment today, no one's here. Mm-hmm. No one's answering the door. And then I would call ICE and they'd be like, don't worry about it. We'll get back to you. This is totally anecdotal, but I had a case of somebody who was, on some sort of order of supervision, checking in regularly, and they got a U visa. Mm-hmm. So they don't need to be doing this anymore. And I swear to God, I emailed copies of the approval notice to 4 different officers in this office. I went and I hand delivered a copy, and they kept insisting that she check in. And I went in, the 20th time that I've communicated to this office that this person has papers now. And the guy went back and he's like, there's no notes of any of this, of the person having a U visa. They can't see that in their computers, any of my emails or communications. So the idea that this massive government agency is telling you we don't have the data or it's hard to get to doesn't come as a huge surprise to me.
So I've also had people who have come in and they're like, they've been in the system. They're supposed to have been reporting to ICE for 2 to 3 years, and they never once reported to ICE. Mm-hmm. And are you living at this address? And they're like, yeah. with absolutely no consequence whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think I'm going to echo what Steven says when they say, like, they probably don't want to answer the FOIA because then it would demonstrate how little tracking they're actually doing.
It's like when Matthew got audited and he had a shoebox.
like, let me see your receipts. And I'm like, what receipts?
He had a shoebox of Olive Garden receipts from the last 5 years.
Where are your books? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, I barely read.
The last thing I wanted to mention about ADTs and how it sort of filters down to the people. Obviously, there's the anxiety that you mentioned and, sort of the fear and all that that goes with being watched. The way that I see it impacting people the most is that people come here seeking asylum, and the process to get employment authorization is very convoluted. And yet they're being monitored. And I have had people get calls saying, like, are you ICE is basically keeping them from working.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing, we live in an agricultural area with a major labor shortage. We've got people being let into the community who are experienced, ready, not just willing, but have a high desire to go do these jobs. And instead, they're being imprisoned in their homes and being made to feel afraid to be productive members of our society. And so it's just crazy to me that we have this system. And on top of that, all these sort of cultural ideas about immigrants, right? That they're lazy, that they're this and that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just a massive failure of imagination and of the system as a whole.
But before we go, you need to explain the CBP-1. Because this is where I think I heard about this app in this whole new thing that's going on the border. I heard that they're going to have an app. And I think that's when I really checked it in and said, this is actually too ridiculous for me now. So is this a thing? Is it up and running?
Yes.
And is there any evidence that people are getting appointments that are being kept? Because go explain what the app is and tell me why I'm wrong and why it's great.
Definitely can't tell you that. No, so the idea is, okay, the U.S. government wants asylum seekers to go through ports of entry in the United States. Don't cross unlawfully in between ports of entry. Don't cross in the desert, don't cross the river. Go to the port of entry. Okay, well, that's great. But one of the main issues is those ports of entry don't have capacity to process people, So then there's a line. So up until now, the way that line has been managed, particularly under Title 42, is regional networks of NGOs in loose coordination with someone at the CBP side are effectively generating these lines on the ground. And so CBP-1 is a smartphone app that's kind of like a Ticketmaster. It's a way for CBP to try to say, okay, if we can process 80 people a day, or they claim that they can only process this many people a day, that's fine. You got to have some way to have a queue. So the CBP-1 app is the queue. You put in a bunch of information, which my understanding is it's not as easy as they claim. You put in a bunch of information and then you get a ticket number. And when your ticket number gets called, you go to the port of entry. So that's the way it's managed. And, again, allegedly, it allows people to schedule appointments. It's not all bad because it does also work around the fact that because so much of the lists that have been managed up until now have been managed by a variety of actors, there's been also a lot of exploitation. So you've got people who are charging $500, $5,000, to say, if you come with me, I'll move you up in the list. You give me a little bit extra money. I'll make sure you go first, this kind of thing. So there is also a lot of fraud, and there's also just a lot of confusion. And
have any appointments been scheduled?
Yes. Appointments are being scheduled now.
Have any people been seen?
I don't know about that. My understanding was, having just come back from the border and talked to people about this, that CBP-1 was available to some nonprofit organizations, shelters and so forth on the Mexican side. And then just yesterday, and I want to give a huge shout out to Taylor Levy, who's been tracking this day by day, an attorney who's been doing fantastic work on this, says that it just rolled out yesterday for Mexican nationals. So Mexican nationals seeking an appointment at a port of entry can now use it. And the idea is that it will roll out to other nationalities soon.
Okay, so
considering the previous Title 42 exemption process had basically been co-opted by the cartels, I guess it's an improvement. So
the thing is, it was complicated because CBP effectively outsourced this whole processing. So yeah, there was exploitation, and the cartels and other organized crime did influence some of the process. But there was also like the sidewalk school in Reynosa and Matamoros in South Texas. Like they're out there hustling 18 hours a day with 100% volunteer staff doing these in-depth screenings and working with these shelters in the region and humanitarian organizations to do a really good job of trying to figure out who really needs medical attention, who needs to be, and so it's not that it undermines their work, but it sort of cuts both ways. It's too early to say exactly what the consequences will be on the humanitarian infrastructure. Will they be able to come alongside and help people fill out the app? That's an option in the app. You can have someone help you. You just have to affirm that someone is authorized to help you. So maybe that'll be great, but it's just hard to say. It's hard to say if CBP will listen if those organizations say, look, yeah, this person has filled out the app stuff and they have an appointment in 6 weeks, but they need to see someone now. They have a heart condition. They're going to go into labor. There's no medical services here for them. This is a humanitarian situation. Will CBP listen to them, or will they say, oh, we're not going to do like we used to do. You got to go through the app. So sorry. So
I don't know. It sounds like everything's fixed to me. So
yeah.
We sure appreciate your time. I got to wrap it up. Let's do it again sometime. Keep up the good work. And
I sold Austin on this being our last show.
Oh, you know what? We talked about that in the first half. We quit, and then we got the band back together in the same episode. So
okay,
we might do it again.
Oh, well, I wouldn't have come on if I thought this was just going to keep going. I was trying to go out with a bang. You got me. You got me.
Yeah.
It's like Lucy holding the football every time.
Exactly.
No, this is great. Just real quick, thank you both for this service. This is a really valuable thing that you guys do, and thanks for having me on. But
really
thank you, really,
it really is
from all of us.
So valuable.
And if you all share that sentiment, you could really pony it up on Patreon.
More and more people are talking about how great we are.
Thanks, guys.
But thank you for doing TRAC. Actually, TRAC's very valuable, and
appreciate you too.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.
Alrighty.